Excellent. So yeah, my talk is called Yes You Can, Small Shifts for a Big Change. So I'll briefly go through a little bit of my history. So I was born with aortic stenosis and a VSD, a couple of other things. And by the age of 12 weeks, I'd already had 2 heart surgeries. The next heart surgery was when I was 9.5. I had a Ross procedure, for all you medics in the room. And then that lasted until I was around 15, where I had 2 surgeries in the space of 7 weeks. So one was elective. Unfortunately, I went to heart failure and then had to have emergency surgery to correct that. I had a mechanical valve fitted. That lasted for a few more years, and unfortunately, I then had to have my pulmonary valve replaced back in December 2017. So that was my most recent surgery. So 6 surgeries to date. The question would be, do I feel lucky? I'm sure all of us can relate to that question. Why me? Should I feel lucky? But it's an apt question because the answer would be absolutely yes. I was born, and Amy, and I'm sure several of us were born on the cusp of when medical science was changing from the mortality rate swinging from 2 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 and more around that time. So we should be eternally thankful and grateful for being born when we were. And the medical intervention and interventions have gone on so far since we have been born. So anybody born since this time should be very, very lucky. You survive. I survived. So what? The problem is that yes, it's an immense achievement. It's a statistical achievement. It's a medical miracle to be alive, but it only gets you to the start point. You know, when I was growing up, it was all about just trying to be normal, you know? And the problem with that is that it's what you do with that life that you get, which kind of informs it, you know, the choices you make. So I challenge you to say that actually it's not just about being alive, it's about what you do with the life that you have. Obviously, having a long-term condition, having a heart problem, is a period in your life. It spans your whole life, but it is a massive journey of ups and downs, oscillations, but it's a massive opportunity to build resilience and mental strength through determination. So we all have a choice. Everybody in this room has a choice. We have choices every day about what we do, who we see, what we wear, but congenital heart problems aren't a choice. But what we can do is choose how we react to them. We all have a choice about that and about any of the choices we have in our life. And so we can choose to potentially shy away, or we can choose to embrace it. One is an active choice, one is a passive choice. And it's not wrong to do both in your lifetime. I've done both as well. That is what it is to be human. But I think by embracing it, we make a positive choice. We own it. We can harness the perceived weakness as a strength. And so it's this choice that I believe that can shape an outlook, a mindset, and a perspective that can create positive change and outcomes in our lives. Now, this is a word that I really cannot stand. I'm sure a lot of us have heard this word in our lives, maybe even this week. Maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was somebody at school, maybe it was somebody in work. But living with a heart condition, this word means so much more. It's compounded by stereotypes, by assumptions made upon you, by people that are supposed to be in caring positions in your life, potentially. And that's not a bad thing, but actually it can be a bad thing when it's compounded over so many years. It can be very, very limiting, and it brings to light a lot of negative stereotypes. This is why I don't like this word. I'm not an unalloyed fan. So, can versus can't. Now, the first time I heard the word can't from a CHD patient's mouth was when I was actually at high school. And Joe, not his real name, was a guy at my school, and he used his condition as an excuse, which I found quite baffling. I didn't hold that same perspective. And as I got to know him, there was just things that he wouldn't do, and that's absolutely fine. Joe has actually changed, and he's migrated. His perspective has changed, but he used to not play football because he thought he might get a brain hemorrhage and die. Now, I found that quite difficult. I had a very different outlook. Part of my kind of can't was also held up in being able-bodied frustration. So my brother, I'm a twin, and my dear twin is very able-bodied, but he never really kind of committed to, say, one sport, or he never committed to some of the things that I would have been able to do, I would have loved to do. I found that really frustrating. But when I started to think about what I could do, the world changes. That word can, it's a small change, but it makes a big shift in your life. And so when I started doing that, I started to play more music, and I did less sport. And so I focused my energies on the things that I could do. And it changed my life. I had a fantastic time playing music. I was mentioning this to some of you earlier, but my dad actually reminded me of this, the egg and spoon race, this kind of perceived normality. After one of my surgeries when I was 9, there was a egg and spoon race at school. It was part of the sports day, and I was so determined to take part, and the only thing they would let me take part in was the egg and spoon race. And I ended up winning it, which was nuts. But it was actually that determination, looking at the things that I could do and taking part in them, that really has informed an attitude. This is a very interesting picture. I don't know if any of you know who this guy is. Obviously, the name is at the bottom, so it kind of gives it away. But he is a very interesting chap. This is an incredible picture. So his name is Douglas Bardo, and when I was 9 and a half, I was sat in hospital. I don't know where this video came from. Watched it on VHS. But this, I watched this film, Reach for the Sky, and it was about the story of Douglas Bardo. He was a World War II fighter pilot, one of the best in the world. And Douglas had a problem. His problem was that in the early 1930s, as one of the best pilots in the world, he unfortunately had a crash, and he ended up having to lose both his legs. And the thing about this picture that I find so incredible is that here he is stood on the wing of his Hurricane, swinging his leg into the cockpit. Now, he was told in that time that he would never walk again. He would never walk without a stick if he did walk again. He would never drive, he would never play golf, and he would never fly again. Not a chance. He did all of those things. But the only reason he was able to do that was because of his mindset, his grit, his determination, his willpower, and his focus on actually the goal that he wanted to do. He wanted to do all those things. He chose a positive choice. And so for me, I suppose I, as a 10-year-old boy, loved that story. It was incredible. I took it with me, and it stayed with me ever since. He had that beautiful saying, to go back to it, rules are for the obedience of fools, but the guidance of wise men. And I think there's a very cheeky side to it. If you ever watch the film, you'll see that he got away with a lot and he bent the rules, but actually it was only through some of those things that he could actually go and do what he was doing. And in terms of his recovery, it meant that he could go and recover in the way that he did. So for me, my mental strength was massively tested when I spent a year in hospital between 2013 and 2015 with infective endocarditis. And it was a pretty low time. I was very frustrated, I was very angry. I was a young person on an aging ward, nobody to talk to. I wasn't able to work, I had to stop work. What do you do? And one thing that I remember thinking was that actually, if I'm going to do this hospital thing, I'm going to do it in my way. I'm going to have to create my own normal, because my normal is just gone. And so what I did was I tasked myself to break the hospital routine, break the institutionalization. And so what I did was, with my little routine, I would close the curtains around my bed, because I was on a bay for maximum 6 months. I was never in a cubicle. So I would close the curtains so they wouldn't disturb me. I would wake up when I wanted to. I'd have my own breakfast. I'd get my own coffee in my own mug, to the annoyance of the nurses. And then I would go down to the day room. I had a series of stretches that I would do because you've got to keep physically active. The first thing I did was to also sign my life away so that I could leave the ward unattended and unaccompanied. I don't know how good idea they thought that was, but there we go. And the other thing was to dress. So we've heard a lot about this in the second talk by Petra, but in terms of kind of tidy body, tidy mind, that kind of representation in your mind. And so for me as well, that was a huge thing. I wanted to feel normal. I didn't want to sit there all day in my joggers and pajamas and just lounge around. Actually, I wanted to make this kind of feel like a normal place. And then I started planning trips. I used to go out of the hospital, firstly for coffee, and then I would go a little bit further. And on several occasions, I went to a different city for a day trip. It's the small things that count. But again, those were very small shifts in my mindset that were enabling me to actually make that positive change in my own mindset to face those things. I also went ice skating. I went down to the ice rink and used to do that. So I used to play ice hockey before all of this kicked off. And yeah, so it's amazing also the power of a smile, isn't it? The reality, feeling like you're in control, which is complete crazy sometimes, and making your world seem a little bit normal. So this is another photo here, laughing. That's my sister pulling crazy faces. We had a Domino's party more than several times in an abandoned room at the hospital where some friends came and we all had Domino's. And I love this picture. I found it when I was pulling this out. This was my last breakfast before I left the hospital, which I thought was quite funny. So when I was in hospital in 2015, I was specifically there for 6 months. I was told I would need a pulmonary valve replacement because some of the affection was apparently on my pulmonary valve. And so I started thinking about how I could potentially use it as an opportunity. And this is where this campaign 6 Times Open came along. I don't know if some people may have heard of that. But basically my attitude, as I said before, when I was growing up, was to operate at a perceived normal, what I perceived to be normal, and that was fine. I didn't really share it with anybody else. But when I was going for this surgery and waiting for it, I thought, actually, I've got to use this as an opportunity. And I actually wanted to make it count. It's not often that you have to have heart surgery, and I really wanted to make it count. So, yeah, it was a change in attitude for me. This is my twin brother. We launched the campaign in December 2016 at the National Gallery in London. And essentially the campaign was there to try and change the stereotype or start a conversation around heart surgery and change, hopefully, some of the stereotypes of what it is to live with a heart condition, what that looks like. It's different for all of us, but what that looks like and what that looked like for me. Shine a spotlight on congenital research. We were raising money for congenital research with the British Heart Foundation. And also to connect with patients and their families and to share stories, share life. Sharing a real story as well, because there's so much advertising out there that actually is kind of misinformed. And I wanted this is the raw truth, as it were. And we were going to do that through a number of events. So we did 26 events throughout the 18 months that we ran the campaign. We did flash mobs in Piccadilly Circus. We did gala dinners at the Savoy in London. We did football matches at the Stadium of Light, National Three Peaks, many, many more, involving people that would never, ever really be talking about heart surgery, heart conditions, or anything like that, but that were willing to come on board and partner and campaign. And it was incredible. We had over 40 corporate partnerships, people like VW, Mercedes, Mournflake, these kind of things. It was fantastic. We were also going to make a documentary. That was one of the things, so for me, making it count. So in my previous life, I used to work in the film industry, and I was like, this is too good an opportunity to miss. We've got to film this. So we actually did film my 6th heart surgery, and we are making a documentary out of it. Living with a heart condition can be a lonely place. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. But we are a family. And there's that lovely saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I challenge you, that's what we've got to do, especially when there's so many people and so many people surviving heart surgery now, being born with congenital defects and surviving into adulthood. We are a family. There's a lot of people that have unfortunately passed away over the last few years. These are a few people that Some of them are still alive. Matthew, unfortunately, the chap there, he unfortunately passed away 5 days before my 6th heart surgery. But being together and sharing stories was something that got him through some really tough stuff. And when I've had phone calls with people around his unfortunate passing, people relate to it as a family. We've lost a brother, and it's because we've had those personal relationships. I want to tell you about 2 people that from the campaign that it was incredible to meet. There's so many stories, but these 2 are amazing. Both these guys were born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. That wasn't intentional. But they both show an incredible tenacity and not letting their heart condition define them. So Tom here is a young guy. He's about 14 years old. He lives in Durham. He's a singer-songwriter. So he can't do sport, but he does music, and he's incredible at it. He's already turned down Simon Cowell for a record deal already. He's unbelievable. But when we met him in Costa, we just had a half an hour conversation with him and a chat. I got a call from his dad. A week later, his dad was in tears, saying, Tom never used to talk about his heart surgery, but now he's talking about it. And actually, he said that having a conversation with you was the first time he's ever spoken to somebody that actually understood what he was going through, which I found, that's incredible. That's unbelievable. All it cost was a cup of coffee. And it was great to meet him. The other guy is Jim Linsky. And Jim ran a campaign called Save 9 Lives, and he had an LVAD and was battling all of that, all the things that go with that, and was waiting for a heart transplant. But both these guys absolutely epitomize what it is to live with a heart condition. Unfortunately, Jim passed away this year. He didn't get his heart transplant, but he was an absolute hero, and I was in conversation with him every day. And he as well was somebody that used to say to me, I don't know who else I would talk to about this. And when I went to Jim's funeral, I was leaving, and somebody came up to me and said, "You're Jonathan?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I've heard all about you. Jim used to tell me all about you all the time. He always was talking about you. You were an inspiration to him." And Jim was an inspiration to me. So one of the other things going through all of this is to be kind to yourself. We have bad days, we have good days. We lose people, we lose friends. But there's a lovely saying by a guy called Alain de Botton, which is love, or his definition of love is to generously interpret somebody else's actions in a charitable way. And I think this is something that we all can take a lesson from. We have to be charitable with our interpretation of ourselves, give ourselves some slack, and cut our friends some slack as well. And we need to be in communities that do that with us, whether that's a family or friends as well. And also share. If we don't share, who is going to share? So living with a heart condition, what's it like? And not being defined by it. So as I said before, this is different for everybody. For me, it's very, very physical. Now, contrary to popular assumption, my heart is not the problem, not the thing that holds me back at all. My heart is fixed in my mind. My leg is my problem. So during one of my surgeries, I had a catheter, and the catheter, unfortunately, was potentially removed in a poor way, and they damaged my femoral artery. And so what happens with that is that I get claudication in my leg when I do sustained exercise. So that's my thorn in my flesh. That was a nightmare growing up because explaining that to the parents, they didn't really realize it. So I was running around, and I would always used to say, I really don't like this walk. I don't like walking, it's boring. And I hurt as well. And they thought I was the typical frustrating teenager that just didn't want to get out. And I was always complaining. And when they found out, well, they're still paying me back for that. But you have to live with it. You have to get through it, and you have to focus on it. And one of the things in professional sport that they talk about is suffering and how you deal with suffering. And it's actually the person who is able to suffer the most and endure the suffering is the one that will succeed. And when you look at some of the races where, specifically in cycling, people ride 120 miles and the difference is 3 centimeters, it's the man that wanted it more, that was willing to hurt to get it. So this is me in December 2017 with Asif Hassan up in Newcastle. This is me, yep. He's a great guy, and that was me 10 hours later, and that's me eight months later. I did the Great North Run. 15 months later, I cycled the London to Paris earlier this year, and I used to play ice hockey, and I'm hoping to play the 2019-2020 season this year. So having the heart surgery for me really gave me a new lease of life. I'm lucky, I know that, but part of that is actually the mindset. It still hurts when I play ice hockey, it still hurts when I cycle, but actually it's the goal that focuses my mind and what I want to go and do. The battle is in the mind. So what I want to do is basically give you a checklist of some of the things that I found to be key in living a heart condition, because I believe we have a responsibility to the next generation to show them a world that has outgrown some of the old perceptions of limits and encourage them to embrace a world where the possibilities are endless. So when you live with a heart condition, where 8 out of 10 children survive congenital heart surgery, there's 13 children that are diagnosed with a heart condition every day, there's no script. So this is kind of my little checklist of some of the things that I would say that can make small shifts for big changes. So firstly, accepting that you can't change the fundamental realities, but you can choose how you react to them. Understanding that the perspectives, attitudes, and mindsets that you hold of yourself and your heart condition will inform your outlooks and outcomes, and those small shifts can have big outcomes. Realizing an opportunity when you see it. Opportunity is everywhere, you just have to look for it, and sometimes it comes in forms that you would not notice normally. Be kind to yourself. We're all conditioned to strive for perfection, the perfection of normality as we see it. Unfortunately, that perception is sometimes set by the world, so you really have to look at whose perception of normality you're trying to chase, and whether that's potentially realistic for you. To be human is to negotiate imperfection every day, and perfection will only lead with one outcome, and that's isolation. And so, we need to be kind to ourselves and focus on some of those things that make us unique, because they're great. Don't let your heart conditions define you. Be courageous. This is sometimes harder to do, but I believe that's something that we really can do if we put our minds to it. Community is key, especially having a face-to-face interaction. We live in a social media-driven world where everything is instant gratification, everything is digital, and actually having a face-to-face conversation with people like Jim, like Matt, like Tom, and building those relationships is the strength that we can bring to each other. And finally, you always have a choice, and if you choose to, then yes, you can do anything. Thank you very much.